The stars shimmered faintly above Raven's hollow lake, their light struggling to penetrate the thick canopy of ancient trees. A group of friends, eager for a weekend escape from the grind of city life, had set up camp by the lake's edge. The air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of pine and the distant hoots of owls. By the fire, laughter mingled with the crackle of burning wood. Olivia, Mark, Rachel, and David toasted marshmallows and shared stories, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. "Has anyone heard the legend of Raven's Hollow Lake?" Rachel asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. David smirked. "Is this going to be one of those don't go into the woods kind of tales?" Rachel leaned in closer. "It's said that decades ago, a reclusive man lived in a cabin near this lake. He was a trapper, keeping mostly to himself. But one winter, he went mad. They say he heard voices calling him from the woods, driving him to unspeakable acts. He vanished, but some say his spirit still haunts these woods, seeking revenge on those who disturb his peace." Olivia shivered. "Great, Rachel. Now I'm definitely not sleeping tonight." As the fire burned lower, the group retreated to their tents, the sounds of the forest growing louder in the stillness. Unbeknownst to them, the legend of Raven's Hollow Lake was no mere campfire tale. In the dead of night, a cold wind swept through the campsite, rustling the leaves with an eerie whisper. Olivia, restless and unable to sleep, unzipped her tent and stepped outside. The moon cast a pale glow on the lake, and she felt an inexplicable urge to walk towards it. As she reached the water's edge, she noticed a figure standing across the lake, barely visible in the moonlight. It was a man, his form indistinct but undeniably watching her. Olivia's breath hitched, and she took a step back. The figure vanished. Heart pounding, she hurried back to her tent, convincing herself it was just her imagination. But sleep would not come. The following morning, Olivia recounted her experience. Mark laughed it off, but Rachel and David exchanged uneasy glances. "Maybe we should leave today," Rachel suggested. Mark scoffed. "Come on, we're here to relax. Let's not ruin it with ghost stories." They spent the day hiking, but an oppressive sense of dread hung over them. As night fell once more, a heavy fog rolled in, blanketing the campsite in a suffocating mist. Deep in the night, Olivia woke to a faint, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. She strained her ears, trying to pinpoint its source. It was coming from just outside her tent. Heart racing, she grabbed her flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly. The beam of light cut through the fog, revealing Mark, standing unnaturally still, his eyes wide and unseeing. In his hand was a large stone, which he was rhythmically tapping against a tree. "Mark!" Olivia whispered. He didn't respond. The tapping continued. "Mark," she hissed, louder this time. Suddenly, he dropped the stone and turned to face her, his movements jerky and unnatural. His mouth opened, but instead of words, a low, guttural moan escaped. Terrified, Olivia backed away, tripping over a root and falling to the ground. Mark advanced slowly, his eyes devoid of any recognition. "Help!" Olivia screamed, scrambling to her feet and running towards the others' tents. David and Rachel emerged, bewildered and scared. Seeing Mark's unsettling behavior, David grabbed a branch from the fire pit, brandishing it defensively. "Mark, snap out of it!" David shouted. Mark stopped, tilting his head as if listening to something only he could hear. Then, with a speed that defied belief, he lunged at David, knocking the branch aside and grappling with him. Rachel screamed, rushing to help, but it was futile. Mark's strength was inhuman. He pinned David to the ground, hands around his throat. Olivia grabbed a heavy rock and, with all her strength, struck Mark on the head. He collapsed, unconscious or worse, releasing David, who gasped for air. "We need to go. Now," Olivia panted. Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. They gathered what little they could and fled into the woods, the fog closing in around them. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and indistinct shapes. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf sent waves of panic through them. They had no clear direction, only a desperate need to escape. Hours seemed to pass, or maybe minutes, it was impossible to tell. The fog was disorienting, the trees closing in like silent sentinels. Then, ahead, they saw it, a dilapidated cabin, almost swallowed by the forest. Desperation drove them inside, slamming the door shut behind them. The cabin was musty, filled with old, broken furniture and the unmistakable sense of abandonment. But it was shelter, if only temporary. David collapsed onto a chair, wincing in pain. "What's happening?" he muttered. Rachel, peering out a grimy window, whispered, "Do you think he's still out there?" Olivia, trying to steady her breath, replied, "I don't know. We need to stay quiet and wait for daylight." The hours dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity. The cabin creaked and groaned, the wind outside howling like a mournful spirit. Then, a new sound. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching at the door. David tensed, gripping the chair's arms. Rachel whimpered, backing away from the door. Olivia, holding her breath, moved closer, trying to hear. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. She glanced at the others, then slowly reached for the door's latch. "Don't," Rachel pleaded, but Olivia had to know. She lifted the latch, opening the door a crack. The fog swirled in, and she saw it, the same figure from the lake, standing just beyond the threshold. His eyes were hollow pits, his face twisted in a grotesque snarl. Olivia slammed the door shut, but the figure burst through, an icy wind following him. He moved towards them, his presence filling the room with a suffocating sense of dread. David, mustering the last of his strength, charged at the figure with a broken chair leg. The figure swatted him aside effortlessly, advancing on Rachel and Olivia. "No, leave us alone," Rachel screamed, throwing a heavy book at the figure. It passed through him as if he were made of smoke. The figure reached for Rachel, his touch freezing her where she stood. She gasped, eyes wide with terror, then fell silent and still. Olivia backed into a corner, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered. "Don't." The figure loomed over her, its hollow eyes locking onto hers. "You disturbed my peace," it hissed, a voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "Now, join me." The last thing Olivia saw was the figure's face, twisted with rage and sorrow, before everything went dark. When the forest rangers found the campsite days later, it was deserted. The tents were empty, the fire long dead. They found no trace of the friends, only the lingering, oppressive silence of the forest. And on still nights, when the fog rolls in, some say you can still hear the echoes of their screams, carried on the wind, warning others to stay away from Raven's Hollow Lake.